I try my best to dispel this widespread perception that economics is too complicated for non-economists. Actually, it's very strange because people have very strong opinions about everything. Iraq war, gay marriage, does God exist, global warming. You all have very strong views on these things, despite not having a degree in theology, not having a degree in energy economics, not having a degree in international relations. But when it comes to economics, people say, oh yeah, it's for specialists, I don't know. But why? If you can have a very strong view on Iraq or Afghanistan without a degree in international relations, you should have a strong view on government economic policy without a degree in economics. I say that this is only because the economists have been fantastically successful in making people believe that it is actually a lot more difficult than what it really is. So they'll tell you, I could explain it to you, but then you don't understand. 95% of economics is common sense. Of course, made to look difficult with the use of jargon and mathematics. And even the remaining 5% can be understood, at least in its essence, if not in all technical details, if someone bothers to explain it to you in an accessible way. For example, what is economics? The ethical foundations of economics. Whether you can separate economics and politics, and how different ways of conceptualizing the economy affects the way we see the world. For example, people think that today's free market economics is a direct descendant of Adam Smith, but this is not true. In Adam Smith and other so-called classical economists, the society, the economy was conceptualized as being made up of classes, not individuals. And the whole theory evolved around how the way these different classes with different material interests behave affect the way capital is accumulated, the economy grows, income is distributed, and so on. Today in free market economics, there's only individual. When you tell people, isn't there a class? They'll say, no, that's an old Marxist concept. But if that's the case, why do the marketing companies have all these class categories when they do marketing campaign strategy? Because they'll look at groups A, B, C, C1, C2, target the advertising according to the type of people. Now, many economists will tell you that economics is a science in which there's only one right theory. There are at least 9 different major schools of economics. And in these several more, if you count minor schools or split the major ones into sub-schools, each with its own unique strengths and weaknesses. And for free market economics alone, you have 3 different kinds. Classical economics, neoclassical economics, Austrian economics. So actually there isn't one right theory. And my contention is that we need all these diverse approaches to economics in order to fully understand our economy, because they all make certain assumptions. They all have different underlying political and ethical values. They have all sorts of different theories about how the economy grows and so on. And to make this point, I give you the Singapore problem, or what I call life is stranger than fiction. If you read only the financial newspapers like the Wall Street Journal or the Economist magazine, you'll be only told that Singapore succeeded because of its free trade policy and its welcoming attitude towards foreign investors. This is partly true. They did have those things, but you will never be told that Singapore government owns nearly 90% of all the land. 85% of housing is provided by government-owned housing corporation, and a staggering 22% of GDP is produced by state-owned enterprises. So in talking about Singapore, I always tell my students, look, give me one economic theory. It doesn't matter what it is, neoclassical, Marxist, Austrian, Schumpeterian. Give me one economic theory that can explain Singapore. Well, there isn't. So you need to know these different theories to fully understand how a country like Singapore could succeed. So in this regard, my advice is that you should not be a man or a woman with a hammer by learning only one kind of economic theory. Because whatever that theory is, once you believe that one theory is true, like the man with a hammer, you will start to see everything as a nail. So I say that you should get a Swiss knife. In this dominant economic theory that is of today, that is neoclassical theory, people are mainly conceptualized as consumers. And work is considered as what these economists call disutility, that you have to put up with so that you can earn money with which you consume goods and services and then derive pleasure, or what they call utility. That's your aim, deriving pleasure from consumption. But what happens in our workplace fundamentally affects us, not just our immediate physical and psychological well-being, but also our identity and our sense of self-worth and our self-fulfillment. This is why these days in many rich countries, a lot of people are very unhappy compared to, say, a couple of decades ago, despite the fact that they have higher income. Why? Because the work has become more stressful. But then, economists tell you, no, you should be happy. Britain today has 20% higher income than, say, 1975. Why aren't you happy? My book is not just an explanation of economic theories and facts. It's also a discussion about the role of economics in public life. And in this regard, I have 3 sets of observations to make. The first one is never trust an economist. And that includes me. Professional economists that like to say, we know what is correct, No, they don't have a monopoly over truth. I already told you that there are 9 different kinds of economic theory. So the right conclusion depends on which economist you talk to. And I argue that it is entirely possible for people who are not professional economists to have sound judgments on economic issues. I even argue that sometimes their judgments may even be better than those of professional economists because they may be more rooted in reality and less narrowly focused. And I argue that indeed the willingness on the part of the ordinary citizens to challenge professional economists and other experts is a foundation of democracy. If you really believe that all we have to do is to listen to the experts, to listen to the professional consensus of the experts, why do you need democracy? Let self-elected elites appoint each other and run the world. This is why a lot of people are unhappy with the European Union. The second point is the Latin phrase that is apparently written on the walls of the city hall of Gouda, the city in the Netherlands, which is famous for the cheese. And it says, I'm not even going to pretend to speak Latin, so it basically says, listen even to the other side. And I argue that this is the attitude you have to have in debating on economic issues. I'm not suggesting that you should have no opinion of your own. But what I'm trying to tell you is that given the complexity of the world and given the necessarily partial nature of all economic theories, you should be humble about the validity of your own favorite theory and should keep an open mind about it. Finally, even while I constantly make reform proposals, I emphasize how difficult it is to change the economic reality. Well, sometimes the reason is obvious. People who benefit from the status quo want to thwart change by any means, lobbying, bribery, media propaganda, and even violence. But the status quo often gets defended even without some people actively being evil. Because the thing about the market system is that the rule is $1, one vote. So this means that the ability of those with less money to refuse undesirable options given to them is highly constrained. Also, we can be susceptible to beliefs that are against our own interests. The best example is what happened when Barack Obama tried to reform the American medical insurance system, and there were all these pictures of old pensioners demonstrating against what they call Obamacare, with placards saying things like, "Government hands off my Medicare." Well, except that Medicare is a government program. Well, this is what the Marxists used to call false consciousness, or also known as the Matrix, the movie. But acknowledging the difficulties involved in changing the economic status quo should not make us give up the fight to create a better economy and better society. Yes, changes are difficult, but in the long run, if enough people fight for something hard enough, many impossible things can happen. And don't forget, 200 years ago, if you suggested that America should abolish slavery, you would have been branded at least unrealistic, and probably loony. 100 years ago, the British government put women in prison for asking for vote. A lot of women actually said, why do we need votes? We have our husbands and brothers to represent our views. Well, this is why I quote Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist, who once said that we need to have pessimism of the intellect, but optimism of the will. Yeah, you have to accept the difficulties of changing the status quo, but you have to believe that this can be done. And finally, as Nelson Mandela used to say, it always seems impossible until it is done.